Today marks the 25th anniversary of the start of 100 days of bloodshed in Rwanda, during which 800,000 people, some say many more, were killed. For the next few hours, we'll have special coverage of events in Kigali commemorating the 1994 genocide. Welcome back to the France 24 newsroom in Paris. I'm Tom Burgess-Watson. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. Now we're going to begin our special coverage of the commemorations in Rwanda, remembering the 1994 genocide, during which 800,000 people, some say more than 1 million, most of them from the Tutsi ethnic minority, were slaughtered within the space of just 100 days. It was on the 7th of April 1994, 25 years ago today, that the mass killings began, triggered by the assassination of the then president, Juvenal Habyarimana, himself a Hutu. Well, this Sunday, it is Rwanda's president of 2 decades, Paul Kagame, who is leading what will be 1 week of commemorations and 100 days of national mourning. Well, President Kagame marks the beginning of those events by lighting a flame of remembrance at the Kigali Genocide Memorial. That has now happened. The flame is now ablaze. Well, this memorial alone is believed to be the site of the burial of more than 250,000 victims of the genocide. Well, we can expect to hear from President Kagame delivering a speech at the centre in Kigali very shortly. Well, around 10 foreign leaders are there in the Rwandan capital paying their respects, amongst them Charles Michel, the Prime Minister of the former colonial ruler Belgium. Well, the French President, Emmanuel Macron, is not there. However, he's represented by Hervé Berville, who is a 29-year-old Rwandan-born member of the French Parliament. Well, to talk us through all of those commemorations, we have a team on the ground in Kigali, which we'll be crossing to shortly. Here with me in the studio, I'm joined by Etienne NSANZIMANA, who escaped the genocide and who is a member of IBUKA. That's an association which honours the memories of victims of the genocide and which pursues justice against the perpetrators. I'm also joined by Mark Perelman from our International Affairs Desk. Thank you very much indeed to both of you for joining me. Let me start with you, Etienne. I mean, just share with us some of your own personal experience, casting your mind back to the year 1994. What does today's commemoration conjure up in your mind by way of memories?
Thank you, first of all, for having me. Okay, the April 7th for every Rwandan is a very special day. For survivors, a very special day. But we don't have to have this special day to remember. The survivors doesn't need a special day to remember every day. It's a cause in their mind, or the lost ones. But today, the whole nation, the whole world gather and to pay tribute to our lost ones. And we have very mixed feelings. We are happy that everyone is commemorating at the same time. I'm discovering the images of Kigali at the same time as you, and it's a very big event there. I've been there with some people from France, and it's very emotional, and it's very difficult to talk about other subjects on this special day. We are mourning our lost ones. We are in very deep souvenir, if we can say that, and so I'm happy to share this with you today.
Okay, and Etienne, how important do you think it is that we do observe commemorations like today? How important is it for Rwanda that events like today's events are held?
It's very important for building a national identity, because the whole country was very scattered. The Rwandan government, they have to build everything from scratch, and the identity was, as the country was very destroyed. So I think this event that bring together everyone for a sense of belonging to the country, and they know what they've been through, and they know very well what they don't want to experience again, and I think they have a sense of giving, not patronizing, but giving a lesson, something to the world that should never be done again anywhere.
And lots of symbolism, isn't there? We've been looking at the torch. The torch is lighting that flame, and presumably different ethnic groups are represented in the ceremonies, and that's again a key part of the healing, isn't it?
Yes, I think everything that's taking place during this ceremony it's very symbolic, and have everything, every word spoken have a very specific meaning, and intend to call back memories of people who experienced the genocide in their bodies, and but even young children. Rwanda is a very young nation. Have a very young population. So many people, a very large percentage, didn't know who was not born during the 1994 genocide. But everything what we are doing is for them also. Yes, it's not only for the survivors or for bringing justice to perpetrators, but it's for the next generation to come.
Yeah, you raise a really interesting point there about the sort of the education surrounding this and how important it is that people are taught about it in school. I'll come back to you on that in a minute. I'd like to go to Mark Perelman, our international affairs editor, who's with me now. I mean, Paul, you have interviewed President Kagame on a number of occasions, and I just, I can see his picture there in the screen. He's been really one of the architects, I would have assumed, of today's proceedings. How much is he personally credited with helping the nation to heal this past quarter of a century?
Well, that's still a very controversial issue in Rwanda, because Paul Kagame, in the end, after this dreadful genocide, won the battle and won the war. He was first and foremost a military leader of the FPR, as it's known, the Front Patriotique Rwandais, and he won that battle. He then morphed into a political leader, and he has been clearly the leader of Rwanda. Some are obviously still questioning his level of commitment to national reconciliation. There are accusations among some members of the Hutu majority that he has been first and foremost a Tutsi president. But when you obviously tell him that, he said, no, I've done my utmost to get over this ethnic identification of Rwanda, the Hutus versus the Tutsis, and their history has been tragic. I mean, one of the anecdotes, because I interviewed Paul Kagame a few times, I also spent sometimes a few years ago, and we were riding in his car, and I was asking him how it was during the battle and when the genocide had already happened. And he said, one of the things I stopped doing was when my soldiers were calling me to say, here is a mass grave, you should come and see. And he was beginning to come every time and see. And he said after a while, when they were saying, here's another mass grave, he said, no, I don't want to go anymore because it will make me too angry and I will not be able to get over it. So he said I had to stop grieving at some point to try to get over it. But clearly, reconciliation, yes, had made some progress, but it's not fully there. And one of the main reasons is obviously that Paul Kagame has been a very strong leader. He is more into, let's put it this way, the Chinese model rather than a fully democratic model. And so his priority has been economic growth, rebuilding the country, and in this he has succeeded. But obviously he has an iron fist. And so it's very, very difficult because in terms of freedom of speech, Rwanda is not a clear example. So under the surface, it's still very difficult to figure out how much reconciliation is actually already there. 25 years might sound like a long time, but given the trauma, it's still a very, very short time. The new generation born after the genocide is only coming of age today.
Yeah, only one generation, as you say, since those horrific events. And I'd just like to bring the conversation back to France for a moment, because the French president has announced that today, the 7th of April, should here on after be a day for commemorating that genocide in Rwanda. And,
if I may jump in, the words are important.
Sure.
And he said, we want to commemorate the genocide of the Tutsi. This has been always a bone of contention. The fact that he's using the genocide of the Tutsis is something that will probably please the Rwandan authorities, especially President Kagame, who had invited repeatedly Emmanuel Macron to come to attend those events, and Emmanuel Macron decided not to go in the end.
Yeah, this is a thorny issue. I mean, there's a lot of history here between France and Rwanda. Rwanda has accused France of being complicit in the genocide through its support of the Hutu-led government back in the day, and of helping some of the perpetrators to escape. And relations between France and Rwanda reached a low point during the presidency of François Hollande. But recently, that relationship has improved somewhat. Let's listen to what the Rwandan foreign minister told this channel about relations between Kigali and Paris.
You've got to deal with that genocide and the sequelae of that traumatic event. Traumatic both for Rwanda, certainly, but I'm also sure traumatic for France. That must be dealt with. But we then focus on the future and how vibrant this relationship, how beneficial it can be to both Rwanda and France. Rwanda has an ambassador in Paris, has had an ambassador in Paris through all this period, and therefore we would welcome a French ambassador in Kigali anytime. But that's a decision that is not made by Rwanda.
Okay, and that was the foreign minister of Rwanda speaking to France 24 about the state of diplomatic relations. And of course, things have improved somewhat during the last few years. Well, for more, we can cross now to Kigali and speak to France 24 correspondent Julia Steers, who joins me live. I mean, Julia, just bring us up to speed on exactly what is happening around you right now.
Well, as we speak, they're just finishing up a private ceremony with President Paul Kagame and several other heads of state, as well as a representative from France, Hervé Breville. They're over at Kigali's Genocide Memorial, where they are laying wreaths nearby a tomb that contains the remains of 250,000 victims of the genocide. After that, they'll begin the more public part of the program for today. Here behind me at Kigali's Convention Center, President Paul Kagame is expected to give the keynote speech, and then from there, they'll continue to a fully packed schedule throughout the day and end this evening with a public ceremony in the Amahoro Stadium here in Kigali.
Yeah, that building just behind you, the Kigali Convention Center, is really emblematic, isn't it, of just how far Rwanda has come during these last 25 years and since those very dark days of 1994. I mean, is that a feeling that is shared amongst people that you've been speaking to, Julia?
Certainly. I mean, the convention center and the hotel behind me were pet projects of Kagame himself. It's part of the reconstruction, both economically and politically and socially over the last 25 years. So certainly it's very important for the capital city to sort of show off during these commemorations in terms of all the progress that's been made, not only on the reconciliation front, but also as an economic hub in the region, which is really how they want to be portrayed.
Yeah, and we were just talking about the track record of President Paul Kagame, and, you know, he has achieved something of an economic miracle there in Rwanda. I mean, growth last year was somewhere around 7.8%, which is extremely impressive by anybody's standards. And he is, however, viewed by some as being something of an authoritarian. I mean, is that the view that you get from the people you speak to, Julia?
Well, it's very difficult to sort of get a genuine view of how people feel, particularly in the last few weeks as we've been on the ground here. In the lead up to these big national commemorations, the messaging from the government is extremely tight. It's something that's put out to the entire population, and everybody really knows that the focus should be on moving forward, on justice and on reconciliation. So it's quite difficult actually on the ground to engage in those conversations about things other than on the economic progress, the political progress, and the reconciliation. But as you've said, we've certainly heard from rights groups over the past, months and years who have lauded President Kagame for the progress that he's made, for the progress that we've been talking about, but who have also, of course, expressed concerns that there could be some issues under the surface that are being unaddressed.
Going back to today's commemorations, Julia, I mean, talk us through, who's there at those ceremonies, and perhaps, quite interestingly too, who is not there?
Right. There are many African heads of state. We have the Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed from Ethiopia. We have representatives from Chad and from across Africa, high-ranking politicians from Canada, as well as the Prime Minister of Belgium, which is, of course, significant because it sort of highlights the fact that President Macron is not here. And there were questions coming into the day about whether or not the representative that the French government sent, Hervé Breville, a young French MP, a Rwandan-born French MP, as to whether or not he would sort of fill the big shoes and fill the expectations that the other world leaders here today have filled. Originally, we were told that he wasn't necessarily going to be included in this private ceremony over at the Genocide Memorial this morning. We've seen in the last hour or so that he was there alongside other heads of state, which is perhaps a gesture, a nod from the Rwandan government. He participated in the wreath laying over there at the Genocide Memorial. But of course, after years of tensions between Kigali and Paris, there hasn't been a French ambassador here in 4 years. There are always lingering questions about whether or not things are really moving forward. As you heard the foreign minister say, Rwanda from its side is saying that they are ready to strengthen these diplomatic ties and to rebuild some of the damaged relationship.
And Julia, I know you're not actually based in Rwanda itself, but I mean, just from what you've gathered and from speaking to people and from, your experience in the region, I mean, what's the hope that an event like today's will achieve, and these next days of mourning and these next days of commemorations? What's the goal, do you think? And how do you think it's going to achieve those goals?
Well, in fact, the commemoration takes place every year, and it takes place for several months. So while we'll see the sort of biggest, most public events over the course of the next week, the commemoration period in the country officially lasts for 3 months, and it does so every year for the last 25 years. Of course, reconciliation is always a really big theme and has been really since the end of the genocide. So both the Rwandan government and international organizations on the ground have pushed for reforms that bring the perpetrators and the victims together. There are several villages across the country where you have perpetrators living alongside the victims. And really this idea of sort of restorative justice is something that you talk a lot about here, about how to use restorative justice to have a forum in order to allow people to move forward. What's interesting about this year being the 25th is that part of the focus today will be on young people. We'll see a play from young people later on in the day. And this is really the first generation that didn't experience the genocide. So the country is sort of grappling with how to involve that generation in remembering. Of course, they're living a bit with the stigma of their parents, whether they were perpetrators or victims. But we're sort of seeing a shift in how some of the tone of these reconciliatory events are taking place because they're engaging these young people. And that's been chosen by the Rwandan government today as one of the themes to focus on youth in terms of how to engage the next generation in remembering the genocide, which is deeply important to people here, but also in moving forward and talking about what's next.
Stay with us, Julia, because we'll come back to you in just a moment. I just want to bring Etienne back into the conversation because we were just talking about this just a moment ago, about how you keep the memory of the victims alive, how education is so important. And there's a legal aspect to it too, because if I'm not mistaken, in Rwanda, there are laws about denying the genocide, playing it down, mocking the victims. These things are illegal by according to Rwandan law. But I'm wondering, I mean, is that strictly enforced? Then, is it working?
Okay, yes, I will answer that, but I want to come back to something we're talking about on stage. The fact that we're talking about reconciliation, about the authoritarian regime and everything, it has something disturbing on this day because we have the whole year to talk about this, and people can critique President Kagame, and they have the right to do this every day. But this special day, when we are talking about the commemoration, sometimes it's very not welcome. Just that was the meaning, but and the Rwanda has done a very tremendous job to bring people together and to how I was saying lastly to recreate an identity that has been distracted during the genocide. But about the law you were talking about, yes, there is laws that enforce that condemn the denial of genocide, the using. Because I was saying, when we say genocide against the Tutsi, it's not a favor for the Tutsis or for the Kigali government. It's only the fact. Because even some Rwandans before have been trapped in this thing of saying Rwandan genocide, but no Rwandan genocide occurred. No Rwandan was killed because he was a Rwandan. People were killed because they were Tutsi, and some Hutu were killed because they were protecting Tutsis. So no Rwandan, exterior power that came invading Rwanda and killing Rwandans. So Tutsis were killed because they were Tutsi. I think it's very important to stress this.
Okay, and that's of course, you know, these measures that we've been talking about, you know, the laws that are designed to protect the memory of the victims. I mean, has all of this, do you think, helped the country to heal? I mean, how effective has it been?
Of course, the justice, the one of the first goals of my association IBUKA. As I was saying, we are not commemorating to remember ours because it's we have people that lost some parts of their body. We don't have to tell them to remember. They will never forget. We have people that have hidden injuries. They remember these mothers that lost their children. They don't have to tell them remember. But why we do this is because of to bring justice, to bring to justice perpetrators, to remember the people that are still suffering for genocide injuries, material injuries and everything, and to remember never to let the deniers have their part in the publishing their books without any how can we say it any response from ourselves. So there's
I want to ask you about Rwanda before 1994, because you were there, weren't you,
yes,
in Rwanda prior to 1994? I mean, did you ever have any feeling, any sense that there was an us and them in Rwanda, or did things just suddenly change overnight? Was it a very dramatic change in terms of the relationship between these two principal ethnic groups, the Hutus, the Tutsis and the Hutus?
That's a very interesting question. Yes, I was a grown-up boy in 1994. I was seeing what the path to the genocide, but it will not be true if I say I was thinking it would be a genocide on the April 7th in the morning. What happened for myself and for other people of my generation? They didn't say, okay, the Tutsi are going to be wiped out, and it's a genocide. We didn't think that. We saw things happening. We saw the place that were reserved to Tutsis. We saw the prevention and but no, a genocide. We didn't. We heard what was saying our fathers and our parents, because they've been through some pogroms in the past years. When the president plane crashed, they said, "Oh, it's starting again." So, but what was starting? We didn't know it would be at this stage.
If I may jump in, do you remember exactly what you were doing 25 years ago on the 7th of April?
Yes, I remember what I was doing on the 6th April in the night. Yes, I know very well where I was, and I came back to my house late in the night. In the morning, we were forced to leave our house. The in Kigali. You have to know that at that time, back in 25 years ago, very large amount of people were already killed. Yes, but it took some time to go in some provinces and to carry on the genocide project. But in Kigali, a very large part of the job were already done. Yeah.
And of course, before 1994, there had been tensions, hadn't there? There had been examples in the 50s and 60s of very serious inter-ethnic violence, hadn't there? Was that something you were conscious of growing up?
Yes, I was conscious of that because I heard the stories. I have a very large part of my family that was living in Burundi, in Uganda, in Tanzania. So I had friends that didn't have all their family was in Rwanda. So I saw the difference, and I knew that it started very long ago. And when I had the privilege to cross and to go to Burundi to see my cousins, I could see that they were they liked to come back to Rwanda. I'm talking about before 1990, but it's forbidden. Yes.
Okay, I'm going to come back to you after a short break. Etienne NSANZIMANA, thank you very much for speaking to us. We'll come back to you in just a short while. We're going to take a quick break. Do stay with us for our continued coverage of those events taking place now in Kigali.
We are journalists, and normally you have to listen to us, but you have things to tell us too. Maybe you've experienced a dramatic event, or you've got something important to say. You want to make a difference. That is why we created The Observers. Now, the first step is very easy. You get in touch with our team. Send us your images, tell us what you've seen. And then it's our job to get your voice out there, on our site, on social networks, on your mobiles and tablets, and on TV, of course. You can appear in our weekly show via webcam. Or perhaps we'll come see you in person, where you live, in your country, your town, and we'll work together on a report for our investigative show, The Observers Direct. So you get the idea. This show is your show, your way to get your voice out to the world.
In 2002, the Boston Globe published a bombshell investigation. The US Daily revealed that 5 priests from the area had repeatedly raped young parishioners. Victims started speaking out and realizing they were alone in their fate. The scandal, local at first, resonated across the world.
It sounds ignorant, but you really think you're the only one, and that blew my mind. That the church did this over and over again to all of us.
25 years on, many of the victims say they're still suffering and that the resignation of a cardinal or endless trials had not healed their wounds.
We revisit Boston Catholic's church paedophile crisis, all this week on France 24.
Making the news on France 24.
2.5 decades after the Rwandan genocide, the bodies of victims are still being uncovered in mass graves today. We're heading to Rwanda this week to bring you that story and to bring you live coverage of the 25th commemoration of the Rwandan genocide. Follow along on France 24 English.
Watch events unfold live on France 24 and France24.com.
Today marks the 25th anniversary of the start of 100 days of bloodshed in Rwanda, during which 800,000 people, possibly many more, were killed. For the next hour or two, we'll have special coverage of events in Kigali commemorating the 1994 genocide. Welcome back to the France 24 newsroom in Paris. I'm Tom Burgess-Watson. Thank you for joining us again. We're continuing our special coverage of commemorations in Rwanda, remembering the 1994 genocide, during which 800,000 people, and some say more than 1 million, most of them from the Tutsi ethnic minority, were slaughtered within the space of just 100 days. But it was on this day, the 7th of April 1994, that's 25 years ago today, that the mass killings began, triggered by the assassination of the then president, himself a Hutu. Well, this Sunday, it is Rwanda's president of 2 decades, Paul Kagame, who is leading what is going to be 1 week of commemorations and 100 days of national mourning. Well, Paul Kagame has already marked the beginning of those events by lighting a flame of remembrance at the Kigali Genocide Memorial. That memorial, by the way, is believed to be the site of the burial of more than 250,000 of the victims of the genocide. Well, President Kagame is then expected to deliver a speech in the heart of the capital. Around 10 foreign leaders are there in Kigali paying their respects, amongst them Charles Michel, the Prime Minister of the former colonial power Belgium. Well, the French President, Emmanuel Macron, is not there, but he is represented by Hervé Berville, who is a 29-year-old Rwandan-born member of the French Parliament. Well, France 24's Julia Steers is there in Kigali and joins me now. Julia, you're following events. Just bring us up to speed, if you will, on what's happening there now.
Well, they're finishing up over at Kigali's Genocide Memorial. As you said, President Paul Kagame was there. He lit a flame of remembrance, and he was surrounded by Rwandans who are under age 25, and that was an effort to highlight today's theme of young people. Obviously, that's the generation that didn't experience the genocide themselves, but that the government hopes will play a role in remembering the genocide and in putting forward that legacy. Behind me is Kigali's Convention Center. After they're finishing up over there, they will come here to the Convention Center where Kagame will deliver that speech today. He'll be joined by the 10 other heads of state who are here. And after that, they'll continue throughout the day, throughout town. They'll have a walk to remember. And then tonight at the city's big stadium, they will have more speeches and a nighttime vigil.
Yeah, of course, Julia, all of this, it is hoped, is going to be another key part of the whole healing process, because, stay with us, Julia, for the past 25 years, efforts have been made to help Rwanda to heal and rebuild. And with so much bloodshed and animosity, it's no easy task, but that hasn't stopped the country from trying various different approaches to ease the tensions between Hutus and Tutsis. A France 24 team on the ground filed this report.
This scene was unthinkable 25 years ago. On the left, Cyprien, a Hutu who took part in the genocide. On the right, Louise, a Tutsi whose family was massacred. Today, they work and live together in what people here call Reconciliation Village.
It allowed us to get to know each other better. The idea is that when we are together, we can talk about what happened.
After serving his prison term, and despite his own fears, the government placed Cyprien in this village, a symbol of Rwanda's unity policy.
Given I had killed people, I was afraid that they would want revenge.
There are 8 communities like this one, an artificial construct intended to blend identities.
We are now at a stage of collaboration where Rwandans, regardless of their history, work together and collaborate for reconstruction.
la reconstruction.
But the government is not behind all of these efforts. Young Rwandans take part in processing their history, even if they didn't experience the genocide. Generation 25 is a show about the legacies left by their parents, whether victims or killers.
Generation 25 basically is addressing the issues young people born after the Rwandan genocide and being part of a history they were never part of. So one big question we ask them, what is memory? Why do we have to remember these painful stories? And we remember painful stories so that this may never repeat.
The show will be held at the Genocide Memorial, an intended symbol of Rwanda's renewal and sense of national unity. But several rights groups say the reconciliation is only surface deep.
Okay, so as we can see there, you know, a lot of different efforts, a lot of different attempts being made to bring about reconciliation there in Rwanda, 1/4 of a century on. Well, Julia Steers is still standing by for us in Kigali. Julia, just tell us, you know, who's in town for these commemorations, and also who is a notable absentee, in your opinion?
Certainly. Well, there are 10 heads of states here. Many of them are regional from across East and West Africa. There are representatives from Canada, from the European Union, and there's also the Prime Minister of Belgium, the former colonial power. And of course, his presence really highlights Macron's absence a bit more than anybody else. Of course, Macron was invited. He cited scheduling difficulties as to why he couldn't be here and sent Hervé Breville, the young French MP, here. But of course, there were some questions as to whether or not he was sort of high-ranking enough to be on the same level as these other heads of states who were alongside Paul Kagame, and as to whether or not his presence here would really serve the role that it was intended to sort of move France and Rwanda forward in terms of restoring diplomatic ties.
Okay, Julia, thanks a lot for that. Let me just go to you, Mark. I mean, Mark, picking up on what Julia was saying there, should President Macron have perhaps thought differently and actually gone there to Kigali?
Well, there was discussion. He was clearly invited by Paul Kagame. There were several invitations. There was hesitation. From my understanding, talking to sources close to the French presidency, there was some concerns because there are a number of legal procedures in France linked to the Rwandan genocide, be it on the investigation of who shot the plane where the president of Rwanda and Burundi, by the way, at the time, and this was seen as essentially the beginning of the genocide, but also in terms of prosecuting suspected culprits of the genocide who have been living in France. So there was a hesitation, and despite insistence from the Rwandan side, Emmanuel Macron decided not to go. What's more surprising is, given the fact that there have been several meetings between Emmanuel Macron and Paul Kagame, that Emmanuel Macron was key to help one of Kagame's most trusted lieutenants, his then Foreign Minister Louise Mushikiwabo, at the head of the organization of French-speaking countries. Clearly, this was achieved with a major push from Macron. What's surprising then is, given that they're improving ties, that he didn't send a minister to attend this ceremony, because past governments who've had more tense relations, past French governments, I mean, who've had more tense relations with Kagame, did send, there was a junior minister sent back in 2004, and for the 20th commemoration, there was supposed to be the justice minister, Christian Taubira at the time, and then there was a last-minute incident, which is an illustration of the very fraught ties between France and Rwanda. Paul Kagame granted an interview in which he again questioned how much France knew about the genocide and whether France had actually helped the regime that carried out the genocide, and then the visit of Christian Taubira was cancelled at the last minute. But this time around, it's quite surprising that, given the number of ministers, not even a minister made the trip to Kigali. Yes, there's all this storytelling about a young MP who was born in Rwanda. His story is very compelling, but he's a 29-year-old MP. He is clearly not a heavyweight, and clearly the Rwandans will not say this in public, but the Rwandans were hoping for much more. This is also probably why, exactly half an hour before the launch of the ceremonies, or actually when they had actually started, there was this announcement by the Élysée that April 7th would from now on be a day of commemoration of the genocide of the Tutsi.
Yeah, so clearly this is on the president's radar. He's very conscious of what's happening in Kigali and what he's missing out on. And that's not the only demonstration of that in these last 48 hours. I mean, we heard from the Élysée on Friday that they're going to open a special panel to investigate just what France's role might have been, because up until now, what has been concluded?
Well, it's a major bone of contention between France and Rwanda. Clearly, I mean, what's really strange is that we see the Belgian minister attending. Belgium was the colonial power. France was never the colonial power, but since the years running up to this genocide, essentially since 1990, the major tensions have been between France and Rwanda because of accusations, not only from Rwanda, but including here in France, that the then regime of François Mitterrand, who was the president at the time, knew that things were really getting worse in Rwanda and actually helped the regime, including with weapons. So there's so much questioning that Emmanuel Macron said, well, there's only one way, is to have historians look at the archives. But this is also a bone of contention, because when the president announces the archives will be open, then several of the ministries overlooking the archive can say, no, this is classified material, we won't give it to you. And also, the makeup of this historian commission is also controversial. Some historians who know a lot about Rwanda have been pushed aside, and essentially it's a commission where there's no expert on Rwanda. It's made up of experts on genocide, the Armenian genocide, the Shoah, but not the Rwandan genocide. So there's lots of questions still being raised about whether this commission will actually deliver the truth, and if this truth will be accepted by both sides here in France, where the military are very much against this, some of the then politicians in power are very much against this, and the Rwandan side. So there's still a lot of work to be done to essentially reconcile the memory of this very, very dreadful tragedy that happened in 1994. But as you mentioned, we could see it coming, maybe not in such a systematic and violent way in the years before.
Yeah, let me turn back to Etienne NSANZIMANA, who's here with us and who has been telling us about some of the stories of surviving the genocide and what life was like pre-1994. Looking at what's been happening today in Kigali and looking at the live pictures, just how far would you say your country has come during this last quarter of a century?
Okay, it's been some, maybe 20 years I've been living in France, but I have sometimes the occasion to go to Rwanda. And what I see when I go there, it's a tremendous work that have been done. And it's every time I go there, and I'm amazed by what have been done. Not only we talk about the development of the country, the skyscrapers and everything, but it's the mind of people, how they interact, how they react when you talk about the past, and the need to go on. And it's very interesting. And when we have the opportunity to talk to European audiences, and we have to bring back the example of Rwanda, it's very interesting that other African countries, because we look to the West when we talk about the reconciliation process, the Rwandan model and everything. But it's I think the part of the world where it's very needed, it's in Africa, and I think we have to look at it very closely. That doesn't mean that the problems are solved or everything is better off and we can go on and boast that everything's done. No, there's still very, very challenges to overcome, but the work that has been done is very, very great.
Just a short while ago, we looked at a report about one of the initiatives to bring about reconciliation. It was a so-called reconciliation village where you have Hutus and Tutsis working alongside each other. One of a number of things that have been tried. I mean, do you think that initiatives like that and events like today's have helped? I mean, how helpful have they been, or has the will come from everybody across the country?
Well, I didn't know about those villages, but I think Rwanda has experienced something that not known. So it comes that can you? I don't know if we can imagine 10,000 people killed per day, an average of 10,000 people, and sometimes very often by the neighbors, by people that we were trusting. So I think the scars are very deep, and everything that can be tried. I guess I give the chance to try that little thing. When we were talking about gacaca jurisdictions, they were very criticized, but what they brought to the reconciliation process or to the I think to the sense of living together and starting a nation building again is very great. I think we have to try everything that can be tried.
And do you get the impression that in Rwandan society, ideas persist? You know, these are the Hutus, these are the Tutsis, or has that started to disappear? Is that identity slightly, or those differences really, those divisions, have they been more effectively erased, the barriers broken down from perhaps, say, 25 years ago? I mean, could you, for example, spot someone from a different ethnic group walking down the street, or are the differences not even visible in society today?
Okay, I think it's not a complete success, but I think the success will be when this question will never be asked again, because we don't see differences. That's what the genocide, the government that carried out the genocide had. It's the neighbors. They knew who you were, but if it was only to look to your face and the spot that you are Tutsi, it would not be possible. We had identity cards when it was marked if you were Tutsi or Hutu, so it facilitated things. But now it's not possible to spot out who is Tutsi, who is Hutu. If you know people before, yeah, but the Rwanda have many people that came outside the country, and people moved. So you cannot go out and in Kigali or in some village and say that is a Hutu, that's a Tutsi. But above that, it's forbidden. It's forbidden in the law. Now it's to say Rwandans and nothing else.
Okay, so first and foremost Rwandan, and ethnic divisions are something that, you know, to a much greater extent are falling by the wayside. Let me just take you to central Kigali now. This is the scene at the Kigali Convention Center, where we're expecting to hear from President Paul Kagame any moment now. It's not clear which language he's going to speak in first, but we will certainly take you there the moment he starts speaking. So those events getting underway. It's a long day of events there in Kigali, which began with a flame lighting ceremony. And this is the scene inside the convention center, just a short distance away from where the flame was lit at the genocide memorial. And we can expect to take you there to listen in to the president speaking there very shortly, and we will do so. And I'm here with Mark Perelman from our International Affairs desk here in the studio, who's met and interviewed President Kagame on numerous occasions. He's made reconciliation, I mean, perhaps the most central pillar of his 2 decades of leadership, hasn't he?
Yes, but also reconciliation, not only through those remembrances. They are very important. But essentially, he doesn't want to talk so much about the past, but look at the future. So he has said reconciliation will only happen if there is economic growth, if there is health, if there is education. So this has been really his priority. And in that sense, what has happened in Rwanda over the last 25 years, especially when you compare it to its neighbors, is really a miracle, because Rwanda has no natural riches when you compare it to the neighboring Congo or anything.
It's a landlocked country as well.
It's a landlocked country. So coming from where it was, just economically, just forget about the genocide of Hutus and Tutsi, and this has been his focus. He says, if people are not thinking about their suffering, their grievances, but essentially about their next paycheck and where they're going to send their children to school, this will do a lot to bring the country together and forget this ethnic identification that has poisoned Rwanda and some of its neighbors like Burundi for so many years.
Let's go back to Kigali and listen in to the national anthem being sung there in the Kigali Convention Center. Here it is.
Please be seated.